Hi there. This is a quick follow-up video to my preceding one on the news that HBO is beginning to pursue development on a Targaryen Conquest prequel TV series. I said I wanted to split this off for time and to give it more focus, examining the issue of how much source material is there. Because there's roughly half as much source material for this in terms of words in print compared to House of the Dragon. As I said, when I envision a Targaryen Conquest series, I don't think it's going to be just the 2-year-long War of Conquest itself. That's like Act 1 in a 5-act structure. Now, this would extend later into Aegon's reign with the Dornish insurgency and then into the reigns of both his sons, climaxing with the downfall of Maegor the Cruel about 50 years after the conquest begins. Well, in this video, going by word count, I just opened up my digital PDF of this and did a quick word count of it. Overall, from the beginning until the death of Maegor, that entire half-century of story is told in about 40,000 words, compared to about 80,000 words on the entire Dance of the Dragons. This is including the first chapter, which is on the reign of Rhaenyra's father, because that is what Season 1 became. But the war lasts 2 years, and it's covered in about 7 chapters. You can see how it expanded the focus. And that's sort of the point, that outlines can be misleading. And when people go, oh, it's just an outline, and I realize I'm at the other end of the spectrum where I go, it's an outline, it's meant to be expanded, but when you expand it, it's not as if it's dialogue Martin himself came up with. And Martin didn't develop these outlines evenly. The problem is, Martin started out writing these in chronological order as sidebars meant to be included in the World of Ice and Fire sourcebook, which he managed to do with the first one barely on the actual Targaryen Conquest. And that ended up being 8,000 words long. And then he'd send in another prequel sidebar, and then the next one, by the time he got to the Dance of the Dragons, they went, this is a novella-sized thing. So by the dance, particularly by the later chapters, he did realize this isn't going to fit in the book, I'm just having fun, this is flowing out of me because it's just world-building really fast. He said it's easier to write Fire and Blood stuff because it's an outline, you don't have to worry about like specific thoughts Arya is having in a given chapter. It's loose, it's easier to do. Still, it got more developed each time, and you can see this as you're reading through Fire and Blood. Like, the Conquest chapter barely has any dialogue in it. And then gradually, as you go through, when you compare it to, like, a late Dance of the Dragons chapter, there's quite a bit of quoted dialogue in it. That's the order they were written in. The Jaehaerys parts between them were written last out of order, but compare the end of the dance to the beginning of the Conquest, they're very different outlines in terms of the amount of attention you could give. That's misleading because Martin has said this would be a larger full-scale thing if I had the time to sit down and narrativize it. That it's a thinner outline in broader strokes versus a little more character detail in the other one. That doesn't mean the events are smaller, just that there's less from the author himself. This is why, as I said in the last video, it kind of makes more sense to do the Conquest as, instead of Season 1, like a short Season 1, might want to do that as a long theatrical movie. Like on the scale of a 3-hour movie, like Lord of the Rings The Two Towers, because there's not that much original dialogue from Martin, you'd have to make it up. There's a lot of battle scenes, compared to the rest of it is more intrigue, and insurgencies. I could see this being a big showcase theatrical movie pilot as a backdoor to the rest of it. And I said, I think there are about 5 acts in this story, whether you do them as a series of movies or a series of TV seasons or a hybrid of the two. That starts with the Conquest, then the First Dornish War, then the weak reign of his first son Aenys, then the rise of Maegor and the fall of Maegor. Now, some have argued, well, the Sons of the Dragon should really be 2 seasons, not 3, but Martin said, this is one of the few solid quotes we have, Sons of the Dragon would be 3 books if I ever fully narrativized it. So I see as in terms of act breaks that the most you can do with an outline is figure out this is a climax, this is a stopping point that would serve as the end of a season. It doesn't really matter how many words are in the actual chapter because it's in broad strokes. I mean, think about other prequels like Nymeria and the Rhoynar, which they've seriously considered. That has very little word count. It's just a blurb in the world of Ice and Fire. You couldn't do chapter break by evenly measuring the word count. You'd have to do it by story breaks, which you can only do by actually reading the material. The darndest thing is, like on social media and comment sections, the worst thing is when you get lectured by people on how many seasons source material can sustain, like, oh, can Fire and Blood really sustain that many seasons? And then they reveal, I've actually never read Fire and Blood. Then what basis are you doing for any of this? Well, I went through the whole thing just by word count to give you a sense of what we're doing. The real point is just the first part works better as a movie. That it's 40,000 words in all, more or less evenly divided between the first half is the life of Aegon and the second half is about his sons. In terms of word count, again, I think it expands. That the conquest itself is 8,000 words, and the remaining 20-30 years of Aegon's reign are another 11,000 words, covering the first Dornish War, which is actually pretty detailed. Then you get the weak reign of Aenys, the start of when his first son is crowned. Martin didn't specify, well, what are the stopping points for you? So I thought, well, would I stop on my word count here? It's the next 20,000 words. Do I stop with Maegor's crowning, or his trial by 7, or he gets knocked into a coma at the trial by 7 for a month, wakes up, and immediately launches his first large-scale attack against the Faith Militant. With his dragon and soldiers, he burns the Sept of Remembrance, wiping out the King's Landing chapter of the Warrior Sons. So, because it's a little on the short side, I measured from the crowning of Aenys through the burning of the Sept of Remembrance as, going by story breaks, I think that would be the climax of Season 3, Season 1 being a TV movie, actually theatrical movie, but going by that, it's about 7,000 words, from the death of Aegon to the burning of the Sept of Remembrance. Which, okay, the first one was about 8,000 words, and when you read it, you can tell this would expand more, because there's these localized pop-up rebellions against Aenys when he first comes to power, and all over the place. There's the Second Dornish War, there's revolt in the Vale of Arryn, there's a revolt in the Iron Islands, so there's other stories in and around the kingdoms which are tied to them, which you could expand on. You read it and go, there should be more here. Then the rest of it, that's 7,000 words or so. There's 15,000 words and change on the reign of Maegor. And I would divide that, okay, the first part is the rise of Maegor, then the fall of Maegor. What's the stopping point? Well, we already did Sept of Remembrance as the Season 3 finale. I would say the Battle Beneath the God's Eye, because that was the last serious challenge to Maegor, that it's his war against the Faith Militant when it's in the field battle stage, like the battle at the Great Fork of the Blackwater, when the Faith Militant still is capable of having field armies and controlling territory. He hammers them with his dragon. They start to collapse, but then there's an insurgency phase of the second phase of the Faith Militant uprising is an insurgency phase where there's all these new leaders like Sept and Moon and the divinely inspired warrior woman Jane Poor, who's basically their Joan of Arc, in different parts of the kingdoms. That insurgency phase would be Season 5. But between those two phases, after he hammers the Faith Militant's field armies, after he captures and forces the submission of Old Town, where they're based, around that time you'd have Season 4 finale is then his nephew, Aenys' son, rallies other pro-Targaryen people. It's technically not on the side of the Faith Militant, but during that conflict, his nephew tries to launch a rebellion against him with his father's dragon, Quicksilver. It's the first time since the Doom of Valyria dragon fought dragon, but he kills him, kills a dragon, crushes his army, and it's Maegor triumphant, is how you would end Season 4, I think. debate this in the comments of Martin said there's 3 acts within Sons of the Dragon. Where exactly do you see the stopping points? Aenys to Maegor is a little weird because it happens in rapid succession from his crowning to the burning of the Sept. Then where would the break be between the rise and fall of Maegor? I think Battle Beneath the God's Eye makes a damn fine season finale. Then season 5, we'd have all the insurgency leaders of the Faith Militant, and then Maegor's reign increasingly spiraling out of control. And as he just, with the Black Brides, how everything falls apart, him dying on the Iron Throne, and Aegon's younger brother, Aegon the Uncrowned's younger brother, Jaehaerys, leading the final revolt against him. Now the issue with that is, by word count, Aenys' Deceptive Remembrance is maybe 7,000 words. And actually, despite the lack of that many field battles, everything after the Battle Beneath the God's Eye through the death of Maegor is a little over 10,000 words. Whereas everything from Scepter of Remembrance through and including the Battle Beneath the God's Eye is a little less than 5,000 words. It's like the shortest section in the whole thing, because it's talking about army movements, not characterization. You see what I'm saying? That it's deceptively short, because if you read it, you go, this is the most action-packed part of Sons of the Dragon. There's field battles. It's talking about dragons fighting dragons and things. So that's why word count isn't always as reliable as knowing the natural story breaks of, okay, if we actually had mentally, envisioning a TV episode is the way I can describe it best, of having, like, the full action scene of Season 7 Daenerys attacking the Lannister supply train isn't that much text on page, but it's a battle where you have, and here's the infantry, here's the cavalry, here's the artillery support. Battles sound shorter than they actually are, because particularly when you're doing a script reading with heavy dialogue, the parts with dialogue seem longer, but then you have to have the whole art of planning out the stunt work and the cinematography of a battle scene doesn't always sync up like that. Still, I went and checked by word count how much are we looking at, and it doesn't mean this is shorter than Dance of the Dragons necessarily. It means they have to round out the characters more, because it covers 50 years. They have to round out the characters more, though. It's an argument for that the first season should really be a movie. The battle parts, maybe they could... No, they couldn't have a second movie suddenly jumping into, and now Maegor is king, without having another movie in the middle. I could even see the argument for doing this whole thing as a series of Lord of the Rings style 3.5-hour movies. Like 5 movies, 3.5 hours long. You could do that. If you consider, like, a normal TV episode is, 55 minutes? Actually, they've tried to adapt this before in terms of runtime. They had that motion comic thing in the Season 7 set on Conquest and Rebellion. It was 40 minutes long. The last 10 minutes were actually about beyond the death of Maegor to the present. So that thing in a motion comic was able to convey pretty much most of the source material in about 30 minutes of the Conquest itself. Not the Dornish War, just the Conquest. I can see something 5 to 6 times that size with, rounding out to 3 hours with decent dialogue, and it's mostly about the action scenes, the spectacle of a movie. I can see that working as a movie. And of course, you have to remember the whole thing, that one of Martin's biggest influences is the famous TV series I, Claudius, the original version, and particularly the early ones, like the Julio-Claudian emperors, that there's this weak ruler, then a tyrannical ruler, and they're all kind of screwed up and incestuous between them. It's all influenced by I, Claudius. So, if you consider... you could say that this is like William the Conqueror with dragons. In many ways, it's also I, Claudius with dragons. Just as the Dance of the Dragons is the Anarchy with dragons. Matilda versus Stephen, if you know your English history. So I envision all this. When I think of Maegor, I'm mentally thinking of the tyrants that are in I, Claudius, because it was one of the biggest influences on Martin's writing, and how much he loves that. And basically, Visenya would live to be very old in the final season as Livia. the king's mother, who is really one of the big political players. But just going by, well, how much word count is there? This is why this is my answer to when people go, why didn't we start with the Conquest? There weren't as many words in print about it. That in terms of raw source material by word count, there was more on the Dance of the Dragons. And on top of that, I think it works better as a TV show that there's two clear sides to it. It's easy to grasp versus some kind of War of Five Kings or conquering 7 different kingdoms or this three-way fight between Maegor, his nephew, and the church. It's the easiest to do. And you go, oh, it's because of all the feminism. Well, there's the most source material. I happen to think Rhaenyra is an interesting character. And it's one of the most fleshed out prequel eras because it's what he could devote time to. I think he'd like to go back to rounding out the Conquest, but then where would he have the time to finish Winds of Winter? Still, I mean, obviously, this is words in print compared to, can we do an Nymeria show? Well, I'd like to see that maybe as a movie. Would work better. I want to see it as a TV series. I'm always for more material, not less, but that's just me. I don't think we've ever run low on material. If you consider, the later Game of Thrones seasons were padding, they took out book material to add in vanity shots of the actors not doing anything. If you think, a normal person would think instinctively, they're padding for time. When you look at the commentary tracks, they're like, oh my god, Peter Dinklage is so amazing in this scene, even though he's not talking for like 5 minutes. And you realize, they did this on purpose. It's not because they didn't have time, they didn't want to do other things. They like doing this, that's why it happened. So padding has never really been an issue for us. It's been cutting out material. As we saw in the House of the Dragon, Season 1 was good, but there's 1 or 2 things I miss from it. In this, I don't think we're going to have that problem that House of the Dragon did, unless they really try to cram it into 6 episodes or something, but we'll see what happens. So far, a writer hasn't even been announced for this project yet. That might change in even the next week. There's a big convention panel they're doing. But we'll see what we're doing. This is a decent amount of source material. But then there's the question of, what are the Starks and Lannisters doing? Which I'm going to split off into its own video.